Welcome to this special edition of 7:30. Less than 9 months into her tenure, Sussan Ley is gone, no longer the Liberal leader and quitting politics. Tonight, Angus Taylor leads the opposition. Senator Jane Hume is his deputy. Here's 7:30's political editor, Jacob Greber.
In the end, it wasn't close at all.
Big day.
It's my mum.
Sussan Ley's final march as leader into the party room with a few of her remaining diehards. The mood, said some who were there, was sombre and measured.
There was two candidates, Sussan Ley and Angus Taylor, and Angus Taylor was successful.
An excellent outcome.
Sussan Ley's ouster, born of political infighting, poor judgment and plunging polls, opening the door for the party's 17th leader.
We must look ahead and put the disagreements of the recent past behind us. It is clear we are running out of time. I won't mince words. The Liberal Party is in the worst position that it has been since it was founded in 1944.
First, he had to dump some heavy political baggage, like his promise at the last election to legislate higher income taxes, a first for the Liberal Party.
There are better structural, fundamental solutions to the cost of living crisis. That's not what's being offered by Labor, and so we won't support what they're doing here. I'm particularly conscious that we got some big calls wrong, especially on personal income tax, and it won't happen again. If an election was held today, our party may not exist by the end of it. The choice is simple for the Liberal Party: change or die, and I choose change.
In many ways, Angus Taylor is a traditional breed of Liberal leader. Raised near the Snowy Mountains, the son of a fourth-generation sheep farmer, as a young boy, he handed out how-to-vote cards against Gough Whitlam in 1974. After a Rhodes Scholarship, Taylor became a business consultant and was parachuted into Parliament with Tony Abbott's blessing in 2013.
The challenge for him, obviously, is to turn that classical economics experience and his consulting into real-world policies that attract Liberal Party voters back to the fray.
Taylor began his first press conference as leader thanking Sussan Ley, whose wretched time in the job will make a short entry in the annals of history.
She took on an incredibly difficult task after a humbling election defeat back in May last year. Her work ethic has been absolutely relentless.
Angus Taylor will need to run at least as hard as she did if there's any hope of saving the Liberals. His first task? To shake off the cloak of political irrelevance they've worn since the last election. And there are plenty of critics ready to write him off from the get-go.
They've changed the leader, but they're still on a dead horse. And what I hear all the time from Sussan Ley, and as I'm hearing from Angus Taylor, is motherhood statements. The people have had enough.
Despite the criticism, Taylor's opening pitch as leader was solid, even though in these early days the detail was wanting. He's avoided any obvious blunders that might come back to haunt him and hammered Liberal favourites such as the right to home ownership.
We must restore Australia to a country where life is affordable, where our kids can buy a home, where you can raise a family, and where there's a fair go once again.
What is notable was how quickly Angus Taylor has moved to play footsies with One Nation on immigration, with much vague talk of protecting Australia's way of life.
Our borders have been open to people who hate our way of life, people who don't want to embrace Australia and who want Australia to change for them.
That's a contrast to Taylor's first speech in Parliament.
Along with a generous humanitarian program, we should be unapologetic about actively seeking out new citizens, and many of them who bring us skills, a strong work ethic, and who will contribute to the fabric of our nation. I have always believed that good migration is good for this country. I've always believed that. I grew up in a town not far south of here, which was a migrant town, and I saw what it brought to the country. We had the first great cappuccinos in this country. And it was a wonderful, wonderful thing at Hume, not far south of here. So I've seen what good immigration can do. But we don't want bad immigration.
It was good to see him not get into the whole culture war thing, get back to what do we do to assist aspirational Australians.
Former advisor to John Howard and Peter Costello, David Gizzard, says the party room has furnished Angus Taylor with a mandate to be bold.
Well, the Liberal Party, in all the time I remember, has never been on somewhere around 18 or 20% primary vote. So this is not the time to be a small target. And I think the 2/3 majority that have elected Angus today in the party room have given him position to start hitting, and he's got to start hitting to the boundaries.
Taylor's most immediate task is to build a front bench. One senior Liberal telling 7:30 the size of the party room win means Angus has a lot of mouths to feed. Inevitably, there are losers, notably Treasury spokesman Ted O'Brien, to be replaced, perhaps, by Tim Wilson.
Can I say Ted has done a great job as Shadow Treasury.
Given the risks associated with political fratricide, today's leadership change has got off to a respectable start. Whenever the inevitable blunder occurs, the test of Taylor's talents will be on how deftly he responds.
You okay?
You're good.
If nothing else, today's party room granted Angus Taylor more authority than it ever placed with Sussan Ley.
It is important that the new leader gets clear air, something that is not always afforded to leaders.
A sentiment she followed up with news she'd be resigning as the member for Farrer after 25 years. A by-election farewell gift for the Liberal Party's new leader.
I look forward to stepping away completely and comprehensively from public life, to spend time with my family, to reconnect with my enduring passion, aviation, which taught me if I had an ego, I'd be dead. It's been quite useful in politics. And finally, as some of you know, I was part of the early punk rock movement in Canberra. I will continue to find wisdom in one of punk's defining themes, a fearless and honest belief in yourself. Thank you.
Former Prime Minister Tony Abbott has been heavily involved in the leadership machinations leading to this moment. Tony Abbott, welcome to 7:30.
Thanks, Sarah.
Now, Angus Taylor may be more conservative than Sussan Ley, but you and he are not ideological bedfellows. Why is he the right person to save the Liberal Party?
Well, I think he's going to be a strong and clear alternative to a deeply underwhelming Labor government. I think he's the right man for these times. I think that the party now needs to unite behind him, and I believe he can win the next election.
How does Angus Taylor recover the ground lost to One Nation?
By addressing the grievances, the understandable grievances that One Nation voters have, and I think he's going to do that by having a much stronger and clearer energy policy, by having a much stronger approach to immigration and multiculturalism. I think we need to put far more emphasis on our unity and not nearly as much on our diversity, and by encouraging national pride and respecting national symbols like the flag.
Now, Pauline Hanson said this afternoon, no one will ever be as strong on immigration as One Nation. Do you want the Liberal Party to chase One Nation on its immigration policy?
No, I want the Liberal Party to have the best possible immigration policy, and that will mean smaller numbers, and it will also mean a much bigger emphasis on support for Australian values. All new migrants have to take the citizenship oath seriously, and regrettably, it's far from clear that at least some recent migrants have.
Let's just talk about the specifics of that. You said smaller number. What number do you think Angus Taylor should put forward as a figure for net overseas migration for Australia?
Well, all I can do is tell you what I said last time I spoke about this in detail, and I thought that we should go back to the average of the Howard years, which was about 100,000 a year. In the last few years, it's averaged close to 500,000. That's far too many. It's put downward pressure on wages, upward pressure on housing costs, massive strain on infrastructure, and there have been issues with social cohesion. So plainly, our immigration program has to be much better managed, and in the end, the important thing is to keep Australia Australian.
I don't want to get into the business of fact-checking numbers, but just on that number that you are proposing, have you discussed that with Angus Taylor?
No, it's on the public record.
Let me ask you an additional question then about what you think this new Liberal immigration policy should look like. Should they go down the path of limiting or stopping immigration from Muslim countries?
Well, I certainly think that we ought to make it crystal clear that everyone coming to Australia as a long-term resident has got to accept Australian values. Now, there are many people who happen to be Muslim who absolutely accept Australian values and are wonderful Australians. But if you are deeply committed to a caliphate, if you are deeply committed to Sharia law, if, on the other hand, you're deeply committed to the leading role of the Communist Party of China, well, it's going to be very hard for you to fit in.
So how do you see the Liberal Party enforcing a policy like that that is controlling for people's ideas?
Well, I think we make it crystal clear to people that this is the expectation that we have of them, and if they can't meet that expectation, well, they probably should stay somewhere which does, or find somewhere which does. And there are all sorts of ways of, I guess, ascertaining what people's views are. Partly we can do it through the citizenship test, which has had bipartisan support for the last 15 or 20 years. Partly we can do it by checking people's social media. That's something which I understand some countries do. The important thing is to make sure that our immigration program is working not just in the best interests of migrants, but in the best interests of Australians. And let's face it, every country has a right to keep its character. Our character is essentially Anglo-Celtic and Judeo-Christian. That's what has made our country attractive, to migrants included, and we should keep it that way.
I want to talk to you about the efforts the Liberal Party is going to make to combat the massive surge in support and the bleeding of votes from the Liberal Party to One Nation. You were responsible for implementing John Howard's strategy against Pauline Hanson, particularly by tying One Nation to extremists. Do you recommend the same playbook now to Angus Taylor?
Look, I think it's a quite different One Nation today than it was in the late 1990s. I think that Pauline Hanson is a much mellower person now than she was then. I think that One Nation has been the most responsible of the minor parties in the Senate. But, and I want to make this very clear, the Liberal Party should not be Labor light, we should not be Teal light, we should not be One Nation light, we should be strongly Liberal. The Liberal Party of Menzies and Howard, and I think that's the best way to deal with the challenge from all the various parties, including One Nation. And it's noteworthy that when the Howard government hit its straps in its second and third and fourth terms, One Nation more or less disappeared. One Nation only reappeared in 2016, and I think there's a lesson in that for how the Liberal Party should be.
So how do you respond when you hear Alex Antic, the Liberal Party power broker from South Australia, say, as he did on this programme last night, well, he was singing Pauline Hanson's praises and he said he liked the idea of the Liberal Party in coalition with One Nation?
Well, the important thing is for the Liberal Party to do as well as it can in its own right and in coalition with the National Party. That's the important thing. I mean, if I'm working for Holden, I can respect Ford, but in the end, my job as a Holden executive is to make Holdens the best possible car.
So has Alex Antic got it completely wrong?
Look, I didn't hear what Alex said, so I'm not going to comment on it. Alex is a good guy. He's a very effective political operator. I respect him very much, but I can't comment on what I haven't heard.
Well, I'll give you a quote. He said, to be successful, the Liberal Party, does have to follow some of that path that One Nation has shown. Do you agree?
Well, we've certainly got to address all of the issues which are seriously concerning voters, and I do think that there are serious concerns about the size and to some extent about the composition of our immigration program. And I think there are serious concerns about multiculturalism that's run off the rails. As I said, there's got to be a lot more stress on our unity and far less on our diversity. And this idea that our diversity is somehow our strength, I think is profoundly misguided. I think that we are all on the same journey as Australians. That means, as far as we can, coming together. And I quite like the way our immigration policy was run in the 50s, 60s and 70s, where there was an expectation on integration from day one and ultimately assimilation.
So you're calling for an assimilationist immigration policy in the Liberal Party under Angus Taylor?
Well, no, Sarah. I'm saying that I liked the system the way it worked in the past, which expected integration from day one and ultimately assimilation. And that is exactly what has happened with the second and third generations of the great waves of post-war migration.
You've also said you want Angus Taylor to focus on issues like the Australian flag. I'll put that loosely under the heading of culture war issues. Given the way the Liberal Party fared at the last two elections, what convinces you that that is an issue, or these are issues that a large number of Australians care about?
Well, Sarah, my own personal experience. When I was Leader of the Opposition in 2013, strongly supporting the Australian flag, strongly expressing pride in our country, support for Australia Day, support for Anzac Day, support for our Constitution, including the Crown in our Constitution. We got 46% of the primary vote. Now, plainly, when you're only getting 18% of the primary vote, you look to the times when your performance was much better. And I think 2013 is the last time that our performance really was that strong.
Do you support Jane Hume as Deputy Leader?
Yes, I do.
On that point, Tony Abbott, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, Sarah.
The Coalition finds itself wedged between the city and the country, and between a surging One Nation, as we were discussing there, and entrenched urban independence. Changing the opposition leader doesn't resolve that. Here's the ABC's Chief Elections and Data Analyst, Casey Briggs.
When he quit the front bench, Angus Taylor invoked history.
The Liberal Party is at the worst position it has been since 1944 when the party was formed. That is a confronting reality and we cannot ignore it.
1944 is a moment in Conservative politics worth revisiting. The Conservative coalition at the time, the UAP and Country Party, had just plunged to 30% of the national primary vote. The vote had splintered across different groups and factions. Robert Menzies founded the Liberal Party, pulling many of those different groups together, united by a common enemy.
The communist pressure all around the world has been very, very cleverly designed. It's a very, very grave problem.
Menzies built a party brand and a Liberal constituency. And from 1949, the new coalition won 9 consecutive federal elections, with a primary vote above 40%, where it basically stayed until 2022, when it tumbled, and 2025, when it tumbled again. Come February 2026, and the tumblings continued. Across a range of pollsters, Here are the latest estimates of coalition support, somewhere in the high teens to low 20s. Labor hasn't been the beneficiary. Its polling is roughly stable. It's One Nation that has surged, from 6.4% at the last election to a number in the mid-20s now. In all recent national polls, higher than the coalition.
Senator Hanson, you said the right to him.
These are polls, not election results, and we don't yet know if One Nation can maintain these figures through the scrutiny of an election campaign. Next month's South Australian election will be the first indicator of that. But it doesn't take blind Freddy to see that the coalition is in quite the pickle. The hard bit, working out what to do about it. Their challenge, don't go backwards in regional areas where One Nation poses the biggest threat, while also finding a way to go forward in the cities, where they've lost so many of their MPs. To win government, they kinda need to find a way to do both. The world has changed a lot since 1944. Word spreads fast now. Menzies didn't have to contend with social media algorithms. These days, political leaders can't talk out both sides of their mouths with a different message for those two constituencies. There's a tug of war occurring inside the party. The Conservative vote looks to have splintered across different groups and factions, both between and within parties. Sound familiar?
The Liberal Party is at the worst position it has been since 1944.
Those groups all say they're united by a common enemy. Not communism this time, but
This awful Albanese Labor government.
The Labor government has failed.
This government has been reckless in their spending.
Labor and Greens have to go.
People have been dissatisfied with what's happening in the Labor Party.
it's possible that Angus Taylor can find a way forward, bring his party together, pull together all its different constituencies and put them in a more competitive position. But we also can't rule out the idea that we're watching something a bit more fundamental play out. And it might take more than just swapping out the person at the top.
Victorian MP Dan Tehan is a long-serving Liberal minister and shadow minister. In Sussan Ley's shadow cabinet, he was responsible for the party's new energy policy, released late last year. He was backing Sussan Ley until late yesterday, and he joined me earlier. Dan Tehan, welcome to 7:30.
Always a pleasure to be with you and your audience, Sarah.
On this program on Monday, Dan Tehan, you said that the work Sussan Ley was doing was beginning to take effect and you should all just work harder. What changed?
Well, it became clear as the week went on that colleagues came to the conclusion that we needed a change of leadership, and because of where all the colleagues were at, it became clear that there needed to be a change. And as we saw today, that was the overwhelming vote that occurred in the party room today.
So for you, was that in the end about backing the winning horse?
No, it wasn't. For me, it was, I'd obviously been loyal to Sussan right up until your program and thereafter, but it became clear to me talking to colleagues that there was a need for change. They sought change, and therefore I had a decision to make, and I decided that I would like to, for the first time when it comes to the Liberal Party, put myself forward for the Deputy Leader's position. So I was very upfront with Sussan when I saw her. I said that sadly, it was my opinion that the party room had decided that they needed change, and I wanted to be able to put myself forward as one of the options for the deputy leadership. Now, ultimately the party room spoke today, and I congratulate Jane Hume on getting the deputy leadership and Angus for getting the leadership of the Liberal Party, and we've all, as I said on Monday night, got a huge job ahead of us.
Has Angus Taylor offered you a frontbench position?
No, I've had no discussions with Angus Taylor about that, and I never have in any leadership spill that there's been in the Liberal Party, and there's been a few in my 16 years. That's not how I operate. I'll wait and see whether Angus has a role for me, and whatever that role is, I look forward to supporting the new team.
Angus Taylor, in his first speech today as leader, emphasised defending Australian values in immigration. On one view, that's an unremarkable thing to say, but it could also be read as a call to return to culture war issues. Is that your answer to your electoral woes?
No, I think it was very clear what Angus said today. We need to have a very clear economic narrative and making sure that we are the party of lower taxes, making sure we're the party of fighting inflation, making sure we're the party of home ownership and making that central, especially for young Australians, but also dealing with immigration. There's a sense that immigration is too high, and also we want the people who come to our country to know and understand the importance of our values and participate in our society according to those values. And I think he articulated that very well in the press conference today.
So he talked about core values, he talked about the borders having been open to people who hate us. But in your mind, how do you control for these ideas in immigration? What has to change?
Well, first of all, we need lower immigration, and Angus spelt that out. And then the second thing that we need to do is make sure that
He didn't quite spell it out, Dan Hearn. He just said lower immigration. He didn't spell out a number.
No, well, that'll all come. Obviously, there's critical policy work that we have to do, and that work has to take place apace. And he knows and understands that. Obviously, it's his first day in the job today, or first afternoon and evening in the job. So we've got to get to work. We've got to make sure that we've got the policies that we can put to the Australian people, because in the end, it will be the substance of our policies which gets us back into the race. And we need to do that when it comes to lower taxes. We need to do that when it comes to fighting inflation and reining in government spending. We need to do that when it comes to immigration. We need to do that when it comes to housing. And that'll be all set out for the Australian people.
So we've just heard from Tony Abbott, and he was talking about what he wants to hear from Angus Taylor on immigration. He said what's required for Australia's immigration policy are values based on the assimilation policies of the 50s, 60s and 70s during the time of the White Australia policy. Do you agree with Tony Abbott?
Well, look, we always get plenty of free advice in politics, but ultimately in the end, the people who set the policy agenda are the parliamentary party. That is what we're elected to do, and that's what we will do. And it'll be Angus as the leader who will set the direction of our immigration policy, with all of us participating in it and making sure we think it's in the national interest and going out and selling it.
So you reject that view expressed by Tony Abbott that we should be returning to an assimilationist policy?
Well, all I'm saying is that we get plenty of free advice in politics, and some of it you'll listen to, some of it you might listen to, some of it. But ultimately, in the end, it is the parliamentary party that is elected to set the policy agenda, and that's what we'll do. And that's what Angus made very clear in his press conference today. He's going to have a very clear vision for this nation. He's going to set that out, he's going to articulate it, and he wants all of us to get behind that and go out and sell it and convince the Australian people that ultimately it's in their interests. It will improve their standard of living and it will protect their way of life. And that's the job of all of us going forward now.
We don't know yet exactly what Angus Taylor means when he talks about core values, Australian values within immigration. That's for him to spell out. Tony Abbott is arguing for an immigration policy based on race and religion, reflecting a Judeo-Christian, Anglo-Celtic Australia. Do you agree with him?
Well, as I've said, Sarah, we get plenty of advice from a lot of people as to what our policy should look like, what it shouldn't look like. What we have to do as parliamentarians is devise that policy and go out and sell that policy, and that's what we'll do. And Angus has made it very clear that immigration will be a key part, along with housing, along with lower taxes, along with fighting inflation, to what we do and what our policy agenda looks like. And I look forward to working with him and with Jane to develop that, because that ultimately in the end is at the job of the parliamentarians, because in the end we've got to go out to the voters and sell it, and we're the ones who are putting ourselves up for election based on that policy platform.
Do you have time to resolve the ideological tensions within the party in time to secure victory in the Farrer by-election?
Well, ultimately all of us know that unity is the absolute key for being successful in politics, and obviously the Farrer by-election is going to be a big test for all of us, and we have to make sure that we're all united in presenting the case as to why the Liberal Party should continue to represent the seat of Farrer following the resignation of Sussan today.
Dan Tehan, thank you very much for joining us after a long day and a bruising week for you and your colleagues. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
That's the programme for this evening and the week. A long one, as I said, in the political life of this place. Now, before I leave you tonight, a note about 7:30. Our executive producer is moving on to Four Corners. Joel Tozer has been an exemplary leader of this programme. He represents everything that is good about journalism, and he makes each one of us better at what we do. It's been one of the great pleasures of my working life to collaborate with him. We wish him all the best and say thank you. Good night.